Blessings, everyone, and welcome to Body Rhythms Extra. The reason why I say it's extra is just because I wanted to talk a little bit about why it is that we have to pay for water. You ever wonder, why do we have to pay for water? Water is supposed to be free. I remember as a little girl that just walking, I grew up in New York, we could just go outside and there was always water available. Every single playground you went to had water. In the summertime they had the sprinklers. Even just on the street, from every block they had a fire hydrant. Most times in the summertime that hydrant had a little trickle of water so that if you were walking someplace, because we walked everywhere when we were young, you could, there's no way you would get thirsty on the way. And the other thing was, we never had to pay for it. It was free. You could walk into any restaurant and say, "Mister, can I have a cup of water?" And they would gladly give you some. So what happened? Where did all that free water go? The treatment of water and even the being mindful of water started back in the 1800s. Back then when the cities and the little towns, should I say, because they didn't have cities then, but when the little towns were new, a lot of places didn't have sewage systems. They didn't have sewage systems. They didn't have really, they didn't have sinks with running water, obviously. So that a lot of the water that was used was well water or lake water or stream water. That's what was used. And at first it was okay, but as the towns grew and more people became concentrated in areas, the waters that they relied on to drink from were being contaminated with the waste. Now at first, they thought that it wouldn't really be an issue because, lakes and streams and things like that have their own natural filtration process. So that when the waste goes in there, it naturally filters it out and does what it does to waste because it's all natural, it's all cyclical. But what began happening is that it was too much waste. And people, towns started getting sick. There was cholera and all these different plagues, bubonic plague and all these sicknesses. And they thought that it was, because of the sewage running down the street. So they said, oh, we got to get a sewage system because, this air is what's making everybody sick. So they started out with the sewage system and things got a little better. But what they realized is that it was more the contamination of the water that they were drinking, not so much the sewage. The sewage had something to do with it as well, but it also had to do with where it was going to. So that sewage water was still being drained into the sources that they were using to bring in to drink. So then there's where they started realizing that, we got to separate the two. We can't drain the water that is waste into the water that we're using to drink. So they started separating things a little bit and things got a little better, but not to where they wanted it to be. So after around the war, I don't want to give dates, just you can go online and look. Round about World War II is when they started looking into treating the water that was being consumed. It wasn't until around the mid-1900s when the government got involved and they were concerned with with treating the water. They felt that the water needed to be treated a little bit before people were consuming it. And there's where they came up with the World Pollution Control Organization. And that was designed, as I said, to start looking into regulations. I think around in the 60s is when they amended things a little bit and started to include standards and things like that of maintaining certain water levels. Now, why do we have to pay for water? It's because of those standards that were set back then that need to be maintained now that ended up with us having to pay. Initially, the water was, the water treatment and the water supply was up to a locale, so that your town or your state was in charge of it. But when the federal government got involved, then they started issuing out grants to make sure that states and localities were giving people high quality water. So, you know, every state got their grant, and they had their sewage system and their water systems in place, and everything was going good. But round about in the 70s, when round about that time, round about the 70s, when it became public knowledge that most of the industrial corporations were really slack with their waste disposal, and so chemicals were being just disposed anywhere, and they were leaching into the natural water sources. Most of our water comes from lakes, streams, you know, on the surface, and a lot of it does come from underground. And it was not until 1970 that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, was formed. And their main purpose was to make sure that these companies weren't illegally dumping. And in 1972, the Clean Water Act was put in place, and basically it limited how much toxic waste industries were able to dump at a time. So as I said, up until that time, the federal government was really involved to the point where they gave the localities in each state a grant. But around about 1987, things started changing. And because there were more and more contaminants and more things that needed to be removed from the water, or to be, you know, concerned about with the water, and more cities and towns, cities were getting bigger and bigger. People were leaving the rural areas where a lot of them depended on well water, things like that. They didn't really need the filtered water, tap water. They weren't getting their water from the faucet. They were getting it from, you know, from a well. So as more and more people were coming to the cities, and the cities were requiring to use more and more water, there's where they stopped the grants, and they made each state and each locality responsible for their water treatment and sewage and how they handled their water. So once that became the responsibility of the state, and they were no longer giving grants, they had to now take out loans. So they have these different water loans, and it's because of that that the states now charge their consumers for the use of the water, because, you know, obviously you have to have pipelines, you got to bring the water in, you got to have treatment plants, you got to clean the water, you got to have sewage plants to take the wastewater in, clean them before they send it back out, because they can't just send that waste out. And now with all of the chemicals that are being consumed by people on a daily, as I said, there's a lot more cleaning and filtration that's supposed to be going on. And so what they do is, instead of the federal government shielding all the costs anymore, they've passed it on, and like I said, the states, they pass it on to us, the consumers. Now the crazy thing about it is that most of the water that we use and that we're billed for is not even water that we consume. Most of the water that we're billed for, and here's the thing, goes to flushing the toilet. So that almost 50% of the water that we're billed for goes to flushing the toilet. And then I think it's something like 30%, don't quote me on these figures, 30 so percent goes to bathing. And then I think there's like another 20% that goes to like laundry and washing the dishes, the cars, things like that. And only about 4 or 5% is what we actually drink. And I believe that the top 4 cities in the United States that use the most water are California, New York, Florida, and Texas. I'm not giving them to you in any particular order, but those are the 4 cities that use the most water. And as a matter of fact, on a global scale, the United States happens to use 2 times as much water as any other country in the world. Now, in addition to making us pay for the treated water, they've also imposed certain laws. Now, these laws, some of you may have heard of them and some of you may not have, are the rainwater laws. And what they basically say, and this is more for people out west where their states don't really get a lot of rain, that are more drought ridden than anything. They're not allowed to collect rainwater. As a matter of fact, it's illegal. And the logic behind it is that because they are states that don't really have a lot of natural surface water, they rely on the rainwater as their source. So their logic is that if everyone starts to collect rainwater, it's going to take away from the state's bin of rainwater. So let's say the state has a funnel like this, and they're collecting rainwater, and then now you go and you do your little funnel, and I do a funnel, and everybody does a funnel. The state is like, man, you're taking all the water. We're not going to have any. So you're not allowed. We're the only ones that can get the water, and we'll give it to you. But the people like, that makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. If we collect our own water, we won't need your water. We'll have our own. And besides that, it's coming from the sky. How can you charge people for something that is coming from the sky? And you know, we have to be careful about legislation like this, because it's rain today and it'll be air tomorrow, and it won't be as easy to get rid of because they'll have all these laws in place. So, you know, it's important to really think about some of the things that's happening, and to even know about it. And how they get the control is like they sneak these little laws in, and people are not paying attention. We feel like, oh, we got to listen to the government. But we forget that the government is supposed to listen to us. They're in place for us. We set up these government institutions for our protection, for our rights, for our living here on this earth. And if we start allowing them to make up these crazy laws and reasons and justifications for why we have to pay for this and why we can't do that, then we're going to lose all of our rights, all the things that, you know, that America is supposed to be built on. So that's something to think about. So again, thank you. That was basically it. I just wanted to share why it is that we have to pay for water. If you've liked my video, like and subscribe to my channel. Please share, and thank you for watching.